Hi, thank you for watching my show, and I'm glad you're back. I'm Amalia, and you're on Growth Factor right now. And no, you are not looking at a comic book character. This is Dr. Anthony Chaffee, and while he looks like Superman, he is a neurosurgeon. He's a former professional rugby player, and he began college at the age of 15. So let's get right to the meat of the argument, Dr. Chaffee. Is vegan best?
I wouldn't think so. And also vegan means a lot of different things. It just means the absence of meat and animal products. So, heroin and Oreo cookies are vegan, right? They're also vegetarian, they're plant-based. So that can mean almost anything. And even things like keto can mean anything. It just means the absence of something, but it doesn't tell you what you include. So you can certainly have a relatively more healthy vegan diet than, say, the standard American diet that includes a lot of processed sugary, sort of toxic foods, which actually are all plant-based anyway. And then you go to maybe a whole foods vegan diet. That may be better in that sense because you're substituting out worse plant products and sugar and things like that for less bad plant products. But you're also omitting meat, which I think is our primary food source. That's what I think all the best evidence shows, that humans evolved as carnivores. We've been apex predators. That's something that we learned as kids, that humans are apex predators, top of the food chain. There are no apex predators or top of the food chain animals that graze and predominantly eat plants. So apex predators, top of the food chain, means you eat all the animals below you in the food chain, and so that's what I think we are. So I think that while you can get a better result than, say, the standard diet if you do it right, you're not going to be, it's not optimal. It's not going to be the best thing that you could ever do for your body.
So Dr. Chaffee, my next question has to do with the entire bodily system, because people who are listening right now, they either want to be better at athletics and look more like you, or they want to improve their mental health because maybe they're dealing with anxiety, bipolar, or even schizophrenia, or some people are dealing with IBS, IBD, Crohn's, the gut. So I'd like to start with the mental health aspect, especially because you and I were talking about Dr. Christopher Palmer. His book just came out. I've been waiting for months for it. And he talks about how we eat can affect our microbiome, which affects our brain. So can you talk a little bit about that, the mental health aspects of how we eat and what we can do about it?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's something that's more and more being understood to be a product of our metabolism and our diet. Really anything to do with our metabolism is going to be influenced by the things that we eat. There was a recent paper that just came out linking a lot of these psychological or even psychiatric disorders to metabolic issues with energy production at the level of mitochondria. And there are a lot of other sort of supporting pieces of evidence. There are a lot of studies looking at a ketogenic diet just at the level of the mitochondria. It shows that when you're in ketosis or long-term ketosis, or you've been eating a ketogenic diet for a long time, you actually increase the number of mitochondria that you have in your cells, and they are also better able to respirate and produce ATP. So they're more efficacious and they're more numerous. So this is better for your metabolic health. And when you're thinking about mental health in particular, you have to remember that ketones are actually our brain's primary energy source. It gets bandied around that actually our brain runs on glucose, but that's actually a bit, I think it's false, because we look at biochemistry in two states. So a fed state, so-called fed state, and a so-called fasting state. And they say, well, when you're in a fed state, that must be our normal state because normally we eat. And the problem is that when we've been studying biochemistry at a molecular level, everyone's been eating carbohydrates. And so it actually only looks like that. We only get into that biochemical state when we're eating carbohydrates. When we don't eat, or we eat anything else, just when we don't eat carbohydrates, it looks like this so-called fasting state. And I think that so-called fasting state is our primary metabolic state. So in the so-called fed state, we have an abundance of glucose, and that is bad for you. High blood sugar actually causes harm. It directly damages the cells and the molecules in your body. And so our body defends against that by increasing insulin, tries to drive this out of the body. And so at that point, you'll stuff in a lot of glucose into your brain. However, when you're in ketosis, or you're just eating what we're supposed to eat, which is just a carnivorous diet, or when you don't eat at all, your brain switches over to ketones. And in fact, even if you have high levels of blood sugar, but you have an adequate level of ketones, your brain will switch completely to ketones. And so your brain actually preferentially runs on ketones. We also need to remember that our brains are made out of fat. About 70–80% of the solid matter of our brain is fat and cholesterol. Okay. And 20% of that fat is DHA, right? These are fats that only exist in animal products. Okay. Another bit of a clue that we really need animal products in our diet. But fatty acids can't cross the blood-brain barrier. So how do we make a brain out of fat if we can't actually get fat into our brain? Well, ketones can cross the blood-brain barrier, and then they can reconstitute into fatty acids in our brain, and then get developed and grown into new synapses and the structural components of neurons, and they can rebuild and regrow these different connections throughout the brain, which is obviously very important. If you stop doing that, you stop building and maintaining these connections, you will slip into senility, and you'll sort of slowly lose your faculties. And it's a very, very horrible thing to watch. If you've ever had a relative or a loved one with Alzheimer's or dementia, it's a very, very painful thing to watch. So I think that's the main thing. Well, that's one of the main things, but also our brains need a certain amount of dopamine, serotonin, and so forth. I'm sure Dr. Palmer talks a lot about how that is influenced by the things we eat at the level of the gut and produced and sent up to our brain. But also when you're in a state of inflammation, just chronic inflammation, this actually suppresses your body's ability to make and use dopamine and other neurotransmitters in your brain. So how do we chase dopamine? We chase it by eating sugary foods, by gambling, by doing certain things that maybe are not that good for us, and we sort of chase that feeling, and that is what sort of makes us feel good temporarily, and that causes other things, causes us to overeat, causes us to gain weight and lose our health, which actually just compounds the issue of our depression in the first place. There's a lot of other things too. There was a study, there's a few studies that came out in psychiatric journals talking about how there's a strong connection between LDL cholesterol and depression, but not in the way that normally people would imagine, because they think LDL cholesterol is bad. But they found that people who had lower levels of LDL cholesterol actually had a much higher rate of depression, and that the people who had low LDL cholesterol and depression had a much higher rate of suicide. So this wasn't just just them not feeling great. I mean, they really meant this. This was a very serious major depression, is a major thing to deal with. And they found that by increasing their LDL cholesterol, they could actually bring out a lot of their patients from this very serious form of major depression. And so now there are a lot of psychiatrists who are recommending their patients bolster up their LDL cholesterol as opposed to getting it down, which everyone else says. Another recent study by Georgia Eade had, I think it was 31 or 32 patients that were basically institutionalized with major psychiatric disorders. Major depression was one of them, OCD, bipolar, and even schizophrenia. So these people were having auditory visual hallucinations, and they're very unwell. All these people had failed pharmacotherapy. So they were all medicated heavily, maxed out on all the medications, didn't work. They were put on just a ketogenic diet, not even necessarily a carnivore diet, but just a ketogenic diet. Every single one improved, every single one. So, that just is proof positive that there's at least an effect. How much of an effect? We can study that, and we can look into that, but there is at least an effect, and a very serious effect, when all the medications don't do anything, but just dietary changes can. So I think that's something that we really need to pay attention to.
Yeah, Dr. Palmer, he goes over that his family background is the mother was probably at some point in her 40s bipolar, definitely schizophrenic and paranoid. And he also was struggling with mental health issues. And he and his mother, he was 13, they were both homeless. So it's just incredible what he talks about. Just imagine if we could help feed the homeless in a different way, that perhaps a lot of them could come back home, because they're just either eating junk food or they're eating too much carbs, bread, grains, and it's affecting their gut microbiome, which is, in a way, rotting their brain.
It is. And, this stuff is cheap. It's cheap and it's available, and You can store it for a long time, and I mean, you can store meat for a long time too. You just dry it and make pemmican or something like that. But it's not as cheap, as you can produce a lot of bread and sugary garbage pretty quickly. And I don't know, what the impetus is apart from just being cheap. But I mean, even in hospitals, this is well known, sugar is not a good idea, and yet we're going more and more and more into the whole sugar thing. It was funny, when I was going through medical school, there were hospitals in Canada that a friend of mine's father was working at, that actually got rid of all the soda machines and said, yeah, we're getting rid of all the sugar. We're not going to let this be around. That sugar's bad for you. And they're all kind of upset, like, hey, if I'm operating in the middle of the night, I need to wake up. I want to get a Coca-Cola that helps me wake up. Yeah, okay, well, a line of Coke will do it too. And that's actually literally what people did at the turn of the 20th century. They were doing a lot of stimulants and things like that so that they could run through and just work for 36 hours straight. It's not a good idea, right? There's a consequence for that. And you really don't want your doctor, doped up on anything, whether it wakes them up or not. You just want them to be, clean and sober. But now it's exactly the opposite. I go through the hospital, I see people, all the things that are available in the hospital, but also the things that are available to the patients. It's all just sugary carbs. That's it. Like literally sugar cereals and juice and fruit cups with added sugar and desserts and all these sweetened yogurts and all these things like that. There's a food guideline on, it's like green is like, eat as much of this as you want. Yellow, like you can have it, but maybe in moderation. Red, barely ever. You really shouldn't have it much at all. In the red section, it may not surprise some people, ground beef, eggs, right? And then in the yellow section, there's, some sugary cereal, this, that, and the other. And they had a number by it, like, this is out of 100, like, how good is this for you? Watermelon was 100. Okay. Eat as much of that as you want. This is a superfood, apparently. You just like, this is just like the best thing you could ever eat, and just have as much of it as you want. You just can't get enough of this stuff. Number two was like, so in the 90s, it was like 97 or something like that, was Frosted Flakes. Okay. So not even like, and Cheerios was below that. So Cheerios was still green, but it lost to Frosted Flakes. So, still a grain, still, just a grainy cereal, but the sugar made it better somehow. That's a real thing that's in real hospitals now, and is now part of the international, food guideline recommendations. I mean, that's how insane we've gotten. And I honestly can't see, for the life of me, how that's an honest assessment of the nutritional value of these foods. How can you possibly say that sugar-coated cereal is better than normal cereal? I mean, like, cereal is bad enough in my view, but I just challenge you to find any sane human being that thinks that sugary cereal is better than non-sugary cereal for pure health reasons. There's no way.
And I think, are you referring to the USDA 2023 new dietary guidelines? Because what I noticed there, if that's what you're referring to, is even eggs are at the bottom. So sugary cereals are the top, eggs, which are a superfood, are near the bottom, and egg substitute is above normal eggs.
Yeah. So that's being instituted everywhere. That's not just the USA. So those are the hospital guidelines here in the Australia as well. And so this is international. So this has been like agreed upon by, God knows who agrees upon these sorts of things, and it's been passed around. And so these are the sort of international dietary recommendations from different health ministries around the world. And yeah, you're right. Yeah, eggs are in the red. So almost never eat these. Ground beef, never eat it. Frosted Flakes, just get it in you. That's just the best thing you could ever have. Just live on Frosted Flakes and watermelon, apparently. Oh, canned peaches. Not even peaches, but canned peaches were, the second highest, and Frosted Flakes were third. So literally, just sugary fruit filled in sugar added syrup. That's now at the top of the list. Eat as much of that as you're supposed to, and we wonder why people are having problems. I mean, that's a no-brainer there.
And I think to go along the lines of the dietary guidelines, I'd like to talk about the nutrients that are in meat versus what's in fruits and vegetables and how bioavailable it is. Because I read, do I have this right? No, upside down. Dr. Sean Baker's book, The Carnivore Diet. He goes over much of this. I mean, he's the one I think who coined the term the carnivore diet. And he's one of the people, as well as you, that really got me out of my bed, because I was telling you before we started that the reason I even started the show is I had trouble getting out of bed. I got out of bed because I have 4 children, but I found no joy. I was trained at university to be a nutritionist, and we learned that, beans and rice are the complete protein, and you should probably be vegan or vegetarian, don't have much fish, meat. So that's what I was doing. I raised my kids on fruits and vegetables, smoothies. I was really proud of giving them lentils and brown rice. And I started struggling mentally. So my brain was starting to rot. My gut microbiome was probably missing the heme iron, the DHA, the EPA, the retinol, and all these, especially heme iron. I couldn't give to the blood to the Red Cross very often. They would reject me because my iron was so low. I was very fatigued. I had chronic fatigue. And thanks to people like you, thank God for Dr. Chaffee, just talking about these things, I feel fine. I feel joy. And that's especially why I wanted to have you on my show, so you can help a lot more people with their mental health struggles, with homelessness, with gut issues. So I want to talk about that though, meat versus vegetables and the bioavailability.
Yeah, so meat has the highest bioavailability of all these nutrients. So if you just look at the packet, someone says, and on the label it says, spinach has this much iron and this much this and this much that, and it technically does, but that's going through a mass spectrometer where you're actually like burning this thing and ionizing these things and then measuring what comes out of that. That's not actually what's bioavailable. We have certain enzymes that can break down certain bonds and certain molecules and then get the nutrient substrates from that. But that has limited ability. So we can't actually break down everything. We can't access anything. A very good example of this is, and something that affected the health of the world for centuries, is corn, maize, right? So we picked this up from Mesoamerica when Europeans went down there and they found, hey, a lot of these people are growing corn, they're eating corn, tastes good, it's cheap to produce, grows pretty much anywhere. Let's bring this back. And they did. And then all of a sudden, for centuries, people were getting very sick. They were getting something called pellagra. And their skin was sort of just rotting off. They were just like feeling just very horrible. People were dying from this. They eventually found, they thought this was an infection. They thought this was like some sort of weird plague that was going around. And finally, some bright spot said, look, I don't, and he was a microbiologist. They said like, hey, can you find out what this is? Has to be a disease. Can you find out what this disease is? And he sort of studied it for a while. He said, hey, I don't think this is an infection. I don't think I'm the guy for you. I don't think it's an infection. And I don't know exactly what it is, but I think it somehow has to do with corn. And they're like, you're an idiot, get out of here. And he's like, all right. So then he was on a mission because he was like, okay, I'm going to prove this stuff. So he showed that it wasn't contagious. You could actually, introduce yourself to other people. You couldn't, get it from them. So it wasn't transmissible. And they did this horribly unethical sort of things that you just can't do anymore, thankfully. They had prison populations, and he just said, okay, let's just feed them corn. Let's feed them corn. They all developed pellagra. Right. And even then, they didn't believe it, but he was able to sort of prove it to them. And I just encourage people to just, don't take everything at face value. The recommendations for the last 50 years have only gotten people more and more sick. The obesity rate has tripled, heart disease tripled, stroke rates tripled, cancer rates have tripled. Type 2 diabetes, autoimmune disorders, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, even neurodevelopmental delays such as autism have increased exponentially. They almost didn't exist before that. Now they're the only things we treat, and they all increased at the exact same time. So there's something going on here. There's something going on environmentally. I think that has to do with our diet. And I think that that's demonstrated by this reversible nature of these issues. Even autism, people are treating their kids by putting them on a ketogenic diet, and their kids are doing much better. There are treatment groups that are using ketogenic diet for that as well. There's a study that came out of Texas A&M showing causation between a lack of carnitine and autism, and and that showed up in the vegan and vegetarian populations because there's no carnitine in plants or fungus, and so you have to get it from meat if you're deficient in it. Most people make carnitine, but not everyone does, or they don't make enough of it. And so if you're in that category and you're not eating meat, or you're not eating red meat that has the most abundant supply of carnitine, which is the first thing that vegetarians get rid of, then and you're genetically susceptible, then you'll set yourself up for disaster. And there's a reversible nature there. When people start eating a different way, the problems change. And so I just think that I just encourage people just to think about it and to maybe try something different and just see for themselves. 30 days out of your life, if you can radically change your health, is nothing. It's absolutely nothing in the grand scheme of things. And so just try it, see for yourself, and see what you think.
Well, we appreciate you encouraging us towards a healthier lifestyle and a better journey. And I encourage all of you to find Dr. Chaffee, his podcast, share him, and of course, share my show. Don't forget to hit subscribe and the alert bell so you can be alerted for the next wonderful interviews like Dr. Chaffee. So thank you for being here. We really appreciate you.
No, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me.